Hey everybody, I hope and pray that you're doing well. Today as we come to our word from the word. And today that word is reprieve. Reprieve. Now, dictionary.com gives the definition of reprieve as to relieve temporarily from any evil. To reprieve was to relieve temporarily from any evil. And that's exactly what we see today in today's passage. And so there may be a time that you and I are finding out that we're really facing maybe not the judgment of God. You know, the judgment of God ultimately was taken care of through Jesus Christ on the cross. But there's times when we're facing that discipline from God, and it becomes painful and painfully clear that we need to turn our eyes back to Him. Now, as we see, throughout Kings, if you've been reading along, you see, this king did what was right in the sight of the Lord, except for he didn't do this. And then you see, well, this one did what was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he followed in the footsteps of his father and his father's father, and I mean, you see this back and forth, and it seems that everything is pointing to the fact that Jesus is the only one true king who was going to do everything according to God's plan. Everybody else that was going to be on the throne was going to fail. But here today in 2 Kings chapter 13, we want us to look at verses 4 through 7, and you'll see this, and this is because of their wickedness. The king is deciding to finally turn to God. And so he pleads in verse 4. It says, So Jehoahaz pleaded with the Lord, and the Lord listened to him, for he saw the oppression of Israel, because the king of Syria oppressed them. Then the Lord gave Israel a deliverer, so that they escaped from under the hand of the Syrians. And the children of Israel dwelt in their tents as before. Nevertheless, they did not depart from the sins of the house of Jeroboam, who had made Israel sin, but walked in them. And the wooden image also remained in Samaria. For he left of the army of Jehoahaz only 50 horsemen, 10 chariots, and 10,000 foot soldiers. For the king of Syria had destroyed them and made them like the dust at threshing. This last little bit just gives us an idea of what they were facing and how oppressed they had become, and some will speculate on who the deliverer was, and many say that the king of Aram had changed, and that's what he changed his focus and left Israel alone. Whatever the case, we know that change happened because he prayed and because the Lord intervened. It's always this statement that people make all the time that God won't give you more than you can handle. And that is a lie. And they try to base it on scripture, but it's a misinterpretation of a verse that's talking about temptation. God won't allow you to be tempted beyond what you're able, but he always provides the way out. And we know that Jesus was tempted and he didn't succumb, so we know that we don't have to either. But the truth of the matter is, yes, God allows us to face things that we cannot handle. Let's be honest, any sickness, the loss of a family member, the health conditions and loss of a job. And there's a whole lot of things. I mean, we could go on and on about all the things that God does allow to happen that we cannot understand and we cannot handle on our own. So with that, there are times that, yes, God's plan is things that we don't understand. And just like we talked about with Habakkuk Sunday and talked about even with Job and revival last year, talked about that a little bit Sunday as well. As we look at all that and think about how we look to God and we think that we know God and we think that we have the right to question his ability to judge and do right, but we don't. God's way is always right. It may not make sense to us, but that's where faith and trust comes in. And for us, there may be times where it's not just God's plan, but it's also God's discipline, where God is allowing us to go through things because he wants us to see him more clearly. Over and over, what Judah and Israel were going through were always with the end result trying to get their eyes back on God, to get their eyes off of all these false gods that they continued to worship, and to get their eyes back on the one true king. But for you and I, what is the same thing seems to happen? That over and over, right, we find ourselves in these deep, dark holes that we got ourselves into, and then we beg God for mercy. And you know what he does? He shows us mercy. He shows us that reprieve. It's not what we it's not what we deserve. It's where it's grace and mercy. Grace is giving us what we don't deserve, and mercy is not giving us what we do deserve. Because if we're honest, we understand that sin results in death. And the only thing we deserve is hell. But thankfully, the greatest reprieve of all was God sending Jesus Christ to die in our place. That's something to rejoice about today. That's something to enjoy, to be able to enjoy the reprieve from God. God bless you, and I pray you have a great, great day.